Welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm your host, Richard Restuccia, Vice President of Water Management Solutions for Jane Irrigation. And today's kind of a fun Friday, right? It rained in Southern California. It's Friday. Spring is just right around the corner. I'd like to say, spring training started for baseball, but we got a little hold up on that. I'm sure they'll get it worked out. They always do. But as we started talking about a little bit of something more fun for irrigation training this week, the subject of Leonardo da Vinci came up. And we know, or maybe we don't know, and we're going to learn today what an advocate for water he was, and look at some of the things that Leonardo did to promote water conservation, water infrastructure, and a few other items as well that are kind of fun to talk about. And what it turns out to be is just a really good topic for a Friday afternoon, I think. Now, leading us through this topic today is Jim Lauria, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Maisie. But many of you know Jim from his many podcasts, his webinars, as well as all the articles he writes. And one thing I really appreciate about Jim and why he's so perfect to talk about this subject is, look, we all know it, those of us who are passionate about water conservation, when you talk to other people, in about 20 or 30 seconds, you see that glaze in their face go across their face, and they just get tired of talking about it in less than a minute. And we've all had that experience, and we realize that, you can't just talk about water conservation. There's got to be a way to make it a little bit more interesting to really get people to pay attention. And when you're able to do that, then you make a better connection. And this is what Jim really thrives at. He does a really great job at connecting with people and bringing this interest to water. And that's why I'm so glad he's here today. Jim, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Richard. Yeah, pleasure. Today it's perfect day for this because today's March 4th. And as I told you before, March 4th is the only day of the year that's a command, March 4th. And so I use this day to look at my goals for the year and see, I start out January, look at, hey, this is what I want to accomplish this year. And then March 4th is kind of the day to kind of look and reconnoiter and see, am I on that track? And one of the things that I wanted to do this year was to make this presentation. And you and I had lunch down in San Diego and I spoke about it. And it's just perfect timing that you would invite me on March 4th to actually make this presentation. So thanks again, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I love that March 4th. In fact, I borrowed it for my stand-up today with my team and pointed out the date. And it's really a great check-in. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So Jim, help me out here, though. What got you interested in Leonardo da Vinci?
So I've always been a big fan of Leonardo da Vinci. I've read a lot about him. One of the things that I would say the largest connection between what Leonardo da Vinci talks about is the way he really looked at using radiant thinking, mind mapping to put out ideas and use them to formulate his note-taking. And so that was one of the main things. I'm a big mind mapping fan. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. But and the other thing is the Italian heritage, right? Lauria, my last name. You and I always joke about it. There's only one thing better to have that name ending in a vowel. That's having ended in two vowels, right? We always laugh about that together, right? So it's been a long time that I've read about him. I studied about him. I'll talk about some of the books that I've used to convey these ideas. So that's pretty much my connection to Leonardo da Vinci.
Now, he was known around Florence as the master of water. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Right. So to start it out, back in 2017, Walter Isaacson, who does a lot of great books on different people throughout history, did Steve Jobs, Benjamin Franklin. So he wrote a book about Leonardo da Vinci. And as soon as it came out, I went and started reading it. And I was really taken with how much Leonardo da Vinci had this lifelong love affair with water. And so I took a lot of notes. And I wrote about it in LinkedIn in the beginning of 2018, what Leonardo da Vinci can teach us about water. And it got a lot of engagement and really, it really formulated my idea about how he wrote about water, he thought about water. We know him as an original Renaissance man. He was born in 1452, right around the start of the Renaissance, died in 1519. He was an artist, a scientist, an engineer. He designed musical instruments. And another book that I really talk about is the book by Michael Gelb. Michael Gelb is a management consultant. He teaches companies how to be more creative, more innovative. And this book, I've read it so many times, How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. I've given it as gifts. And it's also part of how I've learned to think about Leonardo and write about Leonardo da Vinci.
Jim, we got a couple questions coming in, and I want to remind everybody the Q&A and the chat's open. If you have some questions or want to make some comments, please use it. But so one of the questions I had was the original Renaissance man. What exactly is a Renaissance man?
Yeah, good question. So the experts say there's pretty much 7 levels of intelligence. There's numerical intelligence, being math smart. There's linguistic intelligence, being language and word smart. There's musical intelligence, being musically smart. There's kinesthetic intelligence, which means you're physically astute, capable of sports and other things. There's spatial intelligence, being visually smart. There's interpersonal intelligence, being people smart, kind of the emotional intelligence. And then there's intrapersonal intelligence, how aware you are of yourself. And I would say that, Leonardo da Vinci, he kind of encapsulates all that, all those different levels of awareness based on engineer, artist, musician, all those things that he brought to the table. So I think that's kind of what I would say is what a Renaissance man or woman, right? I mean, let's not just leave it to men. A Renaissance woman would incorporate all those different traits.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks for clearing that up. And then we've got another question about Michael Gelb. Who is that again?
Yeah, so he's a management consultant. He's been around for a while. He wrote that book. That's probably what he's most known for. He's worked for a lot of big companies on how to be more innovative, how to be more creative. And a lot of that has to do with some ideas he's picked up from Leonardo da Vinci. He uses Leonardo as a real master of, and he calls him the maestro, right? The maestro, the master of creativity, of innovation.
So that's great to hear. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So most people know Leonardo da Vinci from his most famous work, painting the Mona Lisa, that he did in 1503. And I like to use this as a starting point. There's a lot of things about the Mona Lisa. It wasn't until 2005 that people really knew who she was, who his model was. And it turns out it was Lisa Gherardini, the daughter of a nobleman. Actually, her married name was Lisa del Giocondo. And, everybody wonders about that smile. But if you look in the background, there's what people believe the Trebbia River. Again, one of his famous paintings that incorporates water. And so it's interesting to see that that's, out there, that there's this river that's in the background of one of the world's most famous paintings, not just his, right?
Yeah, this was very interesting because I read your article, right? And I've looked at the Mona Lisa 100 times, seen it in person. After I read your article, I looked at it again and I went, oh, there's a river back there. I would really appreciate you pointing out because I couldn't see it before. It's really interesting. And no, it's very much there. And it's not like symbolic or anything. It's there. It's great.
Right off into the horizon. And that was only one time that he used water in his art. Here's one of his first paintings, the Arno Valley landscape. And you can see the Arno River in the background as well. And the Arno River is part of another story that we'll get to later on in the discussion. But that was one of his first paintings. And then towards the end of his life, he died in 1519. These are what are called the deluge drawings. And for the most part, throughout his life, you could see in the Arno River painting and the Mona Lisa, he shows water as pretty calm and passive. But these show the very turbulent nature of water. the destructive power of water. And most people feel that it's because he was coming to the end of his life, and it was a very tumultuous time for him. And so his paintings of water in that time were really this turbulent, tumultuous nature.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Jim. I'm reading a lot about Stoic philosophers in the past few years, especially because they talk about death and how peaceful it is. And I like that idea. That's a concept I want to embrace. But then I see these and I worry. I wonder if Leonardo had it right, or do the Stoics have it right? It's
who knows? Who knows? I mean, he accomplished so much in his life. Maybe he was just saying that at the end, it was the end of all this great work, and he just didn't want to go there. And so maybe this is just how he presented it. So who knows? So a little bit of history, a little bit about Da Vinci's world. Before the unification of Italy, Italy was really made up a bunch of city-states: Rome, Florence, Venice, Pisa, Milan, Naples, and they were at any given time warring against each other, competing against each other, aligned with each other. So it was an interesting time. And Leonardo grew up outside of Florence, in the town of Vinci, which that's how he got his name, Leonardo of Vinci. And so he was living outside of Florence, but he felt there was more opportunity in Milan. So he wrote this letter to Ludovico Sforza. He was the regent of Milan and later the Duke of Milan. And it's a masterclass in a job application, in applying for a job. Because basically, instead of saying, look, I'm a painter, I'm a sculptor, I'm an artist, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, he basically told Ludovico Sforza, hey, this is what I can do for the city of Milan. And a lot of this in his letter is about water. He said, I can build bridges over water. I can construct tunnels that'll convey water. I can show you how to use water for peaceful applications. I can show you how to use water for military applications. So he really put some thought to it. And guess what? He got the job. Yeah. So Sforza hired him in 1482. And one of the biggest things he did during this time was he painted the Last Supper. And I had the opportunity of very great fortune that several years ago when I was in Milan, my host put me up at a hotel right across the street from the church that housed the Last Supper. And I got the chance to tour the facility and see the Last Supper, one of Da Vinci's greatest works, up close. So really was fortunate about that.
Jim, there's an article floating around the internet this week about a person who who interviewed with Jeff Bezos and got offered the job on the spot, right after the interview. And I think that person read what Leonardo da Vinci did, because they came into the interview and they just said, this is what I can do. This is what I will do for Amazon, not what I have done. Maybe it's kind of interesting that popped up this week, the same week you're talking about Leonardo. But yeah, it's definitely a great strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So while he was there also, and these are the things that he's done, is I wanted to showcase some of the inventions he had around water. So this is a water-driven alarm clock. And I think basically the way it works is there's some kind of a small way of the water, almost like a sand dial, leaking out over time. And then there's a lever that kind of shakes the bed or moves the bed to wake the person up. So it's not very clear, but I think that's the way it works in that.
Yeah, I love that, right? This is 1400 iPhone alarm, right? A little bit bigger than my iPhone, but it definitely got the job done, and in a very creative way.
Yeah, and he was very visionary, right? He came up with the concept of scuba equipment. You see the kind of the frogman drawing at the top, and then you see the way he was going to get air down to the person underneath the water. So it was conceptual. I don't know if he ever really actually did this, and we'll talk a little bit more about maybe why he didn't. And then this is something I really love. He came up with a concept of a submarine early on. Look at that. I mean, he had this idea of what someone could actually have a vessel that could go underwater and move around and with one man sub, right? So really innovative for the late 1400s, early 1500s.
I love that drawing, Jim, especially for the sunfish. Right? It's so technical on the other parts, but then that sunfish is drawn in there. It's
but
great.
that's the way he thought, right? He took a lot of things from nature, and we'll talk a lot more about that. So one of the people that really recognized Da Vinci's scientific and engineering capabilities was Giovanni Venturi, back 200 years after Da Vinci died. But Giovanni Venturi was a hydraulic engineer, and there's a special place in my heart. Obviously, working for Mazie Injector Company, Angelo Mazie created the company around delivering irrigation nutrients and fertilizer using the Venturi principle, using it in the injectors, and almost all the products that we sell are based on this principle. So it's something that people in his time recognized Da Vinci more for his artistic ability, his music ability, but it was really Giovanni Venturi that started talking and presenting the ideas around his work in water and hydraulics.
And this thesis and then the laws around Venturi injection that were created then, are they the same principles you use at Mazie today?
Absolutely. I mean, Angelo's done a lot of work to really find out how to make them most efficient and those different measurements, but it works the same way. I mean, basically at that, the narrow throat in the Venturi injector creates more velocity of the water. And as that water increases in velocity, it creates a suction, and that suction pulls in gas, liquid, whatever you're trying to put in, and does a good job of not only pulling it in, but mixing it in the stream of water as it comes through. So you're using the motive force of water to really gain that advantage, using the power of water. And we'll talk more about that, harnessing the power of water, as we go along in our discussion.
Yeah, and I love it that they were able to do that without a Texas Instrument calculator or
Yeah, for sure. A lot of measurements, and yeah, no, absolutely. So now I'm going to go into some of the key learnings I picked up from the study of Leonardo and what he said about water. And when I do that, I'm going to use some of the quotes, some of his famous quotes that he used around water. I've got like 15 favorite quotes that I use. I published that on LinkedIn as well, but this is probably the number one, the most famous one. Water is the driver of nature. And he did a lot of work around the hydrological cycle. He studied it. He really showed how the oceans, you pulled up water from the ocean into the clouds, around, moving water through the earth. Very interesting stuff that he really felt that was really important to humans and to the world.
What I really appreciated about him being called the master of water, he was very quick to point out nobody can master water, right? You have to learn to work with it. And if you can learn to work with it, then you can harness the power of water to work for you instead of trying to master it.
Yeah, and I think he'd be rolling over in his grave now to see how we haven't mastered it. And so I found this from the National Drought Mitigation Center, the hydrological cycle of water. And it kind of tells us where we've been, right? Especially here in California, we only wait until it's at its worst that we decide that we need to do things about it. And maybe it's even worse than this, Richard, because now it might be the hydrological reality now that we're kind of in a mega drought. And so there's things we can do. And again, we should listen to Leonardo da Vinci about some of the things, the way to look at conservation and the way to manage water. So
yeah, and when I think about the cycle this year, right, I think in November, we were in the kind of in the panic. And in December, we got that snow, and then we were back to apathy. And then January, February, March, now we're back to panic. Yeah. And this is all in just a few months. We've been through this cycle a couple times.
Exactly. The other thing he did was he drew this Vitruvian man, right? And one of the things that he really focused on was he was a systems thinker, and he really had the idea that man was a microcosm of the earth. The earth and the universe was a macrocosm, man was a microcosm. And he did a lot of work around dissecting cadavers. He worked with doctors to understand the human body. And here's a drawing of the heart. After he took it out of a cadaver, he dissected it, and then he looked at all the different working portions of the heart. And he felt that the earth was almost like a human body, where the blood flowed through, just like water flowed through the earth and moved around. And we talked about the hydrological cycle. And to me, I look at it, if you looked at it in modern day terms, as a water treatment system, you would look at the heart as the pump, right? You've got the pump moving water through the pipes, the veins, the arteries. You've got aeration systems that are moving oxygen through the system to keep it aerobic, so it doesn't go anaerobic or septic. You're acting like the lungs. You've got the kidneys and the liver. You've got filtration systems that remove toxins from the system, like a filtration system would. You've got disinfection systems, chlorine, UV, ozone, to kill any pathogens like the immune system. And then you've got sensors, right? You've got, right now, we've got optical sensors that can measure turbidity. You've got acoustic sensors that can measure, can hear. You can actually hear the leaks underground. You've got pH sensors that taste, if you will, whether water is basic or acidic. So, and then you've got the brain, right? And the brain kind of is a SCADA system, managing all these things, monitoring, making it self-aware of itself, feedback loops, feed-forward loops. So I like to think of it in that terms, and that's how he saw it as a, he saw the forest and the trees. He saw the parts, and he saw the whole, and he saw how they all came together.
Yeah, so using this information or these thoughts he had, wasn't he really influential in urban design that we even still use today?
Absolutely, and that's my next slide. So he did a lot of maps, and this is a map of the city of Imola. But one of the big things that he worked on was the conceptualization of how Milan should actually operate. And what he said was that the residents, the citizens, should live at the highest level, at the ground closest to the purest source of water, the aqueducts bringing in the fresh water. And then below them were the industries, the tanneries, the slaughterhouses, where the animals were raised, so that water could flow down away from the people. And he felt that, and you can see in his quote, he talks about the different natures of water, that sometimes it's health-giving and sometimes it's poisonous. And this was well before, the cholera epidemic in London, John Snow taking off the handle at the Broad Street handle, and people recognizing that a lot of disease was waterborne. But Da Vinci in the 1500s, he recognized that people shouldn't be around contaminated water, that it should be moved away from the citizens and they should live above that. So interesting way he saw things from an infrastructure standpoint. And then he was really an understanding of the power of water, how to harness the power of water. He designed water wheels, he designed screw conveyors to move water and to use it to grind and mill wheat into flour. I mean, we're talking about Italy, the land of pasta. I mean, for that alone, he should be a national hero, right? So, and then also to weave textiles and do other things around the use of water to actually harness its exceptional ability. He was all about the water energy nexus long before anybody talked about that, right? And we talked a little bit about his inventions, right? The scuba equipment and the submarine. So he wrote, "Why is it that I do not describe my method for remaining underwater and how long I can remain there without coming up for air? I do not wish to publish this because of the evil nature of men who might use it to murder on the seabed." So he was a bit of a hippie. He was a real peaceful guy. He walked around in his rose-colored tunic, really not wanting to hurt anybody, and he got along with everybody from everything you can read about it. But he was roped in. He kind of got roped in by Niccolo Machiavelli to do some work using water from a military standpoint. And Machiavelli was an agent of the Borgias. And I don't know, people know who the Borgias were, but they were a pretty nasty bunch. If you've ever watched the show, HBO show Succession, the Roy family, the Borgias, they were a 16th century version of the Roy family, but much more treacherous, much more murderous than those guys ever are. And they came up with a plan. Florence at the time, and Machiavelli was born and raised in Florence. They were in a war with Pisa, and Pisa had access to the Arno River, the one we talked about early on that Da Vinci had painted, and they were trying to divert it away from Pisa to bring the city to their knees, because obviously it was their source of water for all the things we talked about. And Da Vinci came up with a plan how to divert it, and he did a lot of study. But as happens with a lot of times around water projects, even today, the scope was not fully extended. The contractor took shortcuts. It was over budget. It was under, the time was under budgeted for, and it never really worked out. And I personally think that probably Da Vinci was happy that it didn't work out, so that they really didn't harm the people, the citizens of Pisa, with some ideas he had. But he did come up with these ideas around water for military strategy.
That's interesting. Over budget, over time. I was on that job last week.
Exactly. So some things don't change around water projects, right? And then he was really big on study. He really invested a lot of time on studying and writing his ideas down. And let's face it, he could have made a lot more money just concentrating on his painting. I mean, you look at what Salvator Mundi, the savior of the world, went for in 2017 for over $450 million. And I joke about it that this is just this one painting. This outbanks Banksy by big time, right? I mean, this is serious money for something that was painted 500 years ago. And but he could have made a lot more money, but he felt that you really needed to study, to invest time in research. And so it's a good a lesson for all of us that money's important, but you need to spend time on research.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because a few years ago, I read, that a lot of young kids at the time didn't think being smart was was cool. And sometimes even the smart kids would play down how intelligent they were because they thought it was cool. But Leonardo didn't feel that way, did he?
No, he studied, and he studied hard. He wrote, and we'll talk about that next. That when you put together the science of motions and water, remember to include all the information, because he kept a very detailed journal. And this Codex Leicester is a famous compilation of his scientific writings that he put together. And it's been owned by a number of different people. It's called the Codex Leicester because it was owned by Thomas Cook for a while, who was the Earl of Leicester. And it was sold in 1994 to Bill Gates for over $30 million. And it shows, and for a large portion of it, it's dedicated to water and his study of water, siphon studies, and some of the things we talked about around the use of water for energy, power applications. So he really thought that not only should you do the research, but you should put it down so that other people can learn from it, right?
That's the real generous part of the learning, right? It's not, he didn't flaunt that he was smart. He shared to better everybody.
Right. And to your point, he was also, he was always going to be the smartest guy in the room, but he wasn't afraid to go to experts. So when he was doing his work around dissecting human body, he conferred with doctors, and he didn't feel like he would diminish his intelligence by reaching out and asking questions of other people.
Yeah, we can all learn from that, right?
Exactly. So here's some more of his notes. And as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, he really had an idea about linear and radiant thinking. And he's considered the father of mind mapping, this radiant style of putting down notes and not just writing it linearly. And I'm a big fan of this mind mapping concept. And you can see how the notes were taken and drawings, and it's kind of a mishmash of ideas, but for him it really worked, and it really was able for him to convey good information both to himself and to other people. And then one of his other famous quotes that I like is, when you put your hand in a flowing stream, you touch the last that has gone before and the first of what is to come. And if you look at water in its state, right? So you look at the left where it's a stream or a river, it's kind of linear flow, right? It starts one place and ends someplace else. And then if you look on the right side, you see the drop of water radiating out in pools. And according to Michael Gelb, this was one of Da Vinci's favorite images, the way water radiates out. So you've got the radiant type of water, and you've got the linear flow. But if you look at that, the linear flow, the stream or the river, there's swirls, there's eddies, there's waves. And then if you look at the radiant flow, it's a bunch of vectors infinitely going out in all directions in a straight line, making that flow. So we hear Bruce Lee say, be like water, my friend. Well, I think that maybe what Da Vinci was saying to us is think like water, and maybe using these different styles of thinking, it can help us solve some of the challenges that we face in our everyday trying to figure out the best way to manage these water problems. With that, thank you so much, Rich. I really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the audience. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you do, please subscribe to my newsletter, To Know Water is to Love Water. I write about a lot of this stuff. Da Vinci is always part of the conversation. So with that, I'll take any questions that have come up.
Yeah, wow, Jim, I want to say thank you. This was fantastic, very interesting. Like I said, it helps make water a little bit more entertaining. It's our Friday. The masks are off now for most of us, and we're socializing again. Everybody has a lot of information to share this weekend that's going to be interesting conversation. So awesome. that was really great. I really appreciate that, and appreciate you taking time to share this with everybody.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And I also want to thank everybody who joined today. We know your time is valuable, so we always appreciate it when you share some of that valuable time with us. As you know, all our trainings are on the janesusa.com/trainings page. About 150 of them on there now for how-tos to interesting things like Leonardo da Vinci now. And we're also everywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. It's really exciting to think that people are out there in their work day, driving, working, listening, educating themselves on water conservation and sustainability. That's really encouraging to me and what we do every day. So thank you all for that. And Jim, thanks again for all this interesting information. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Richard. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.